All right, let's just jump right in. We're talking about June 4th, 2018. That's the day Microsoft announced it was buying GitHub. And look, this wasn't just another big tech acquisition. This sent a massive shockwave through the entire industry. For a lot of people, it felt like something that was just impossible had actually happened. So pigs do fly. You know, that quote from developer Brian Cantrell, it just perfectly captured what everyone was feeling: total disbelief. The very idea of Microsoft, the company that for years fought against open source, buying GitHub, which is pretty much the beating heart of the open source world, well, it sounded like something out of a fantasy. It was one of those headlines that made you stop, do a double take, and just go, wait, what? And the price tag alone told you just how serious Microsoft was. We're not talking about a small deal here. This was a $7.5 billion all-stock transaction. A number that big isn't just a purchase, it's a huge, undeniable, strategic stake. So let's really dig into why this felt so completely earth-shattering. Why was this the moment where it felt like, yeah, pigs had finally grown wings and taken off? You know, the shock really all comes down to history. GitHub wasn't just a website. It had become the absolute center of gravity for the open source community. And the company buying it was Microsoft, a company that so many developers, especially those with what you might call old school open source roots, saw as its #1 all-time nemesis. Okay, but here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. You'd expect massive outrage, right? But that never really happened. Instead, the reaction was, well, surprisingly positive. And that begs the question, why? And this slide just says it all. You've got the old Microsoft with CEO Steve Ballmer back in 2001, famously calling Linux a cancer. I mean, that's the image that was burned into the minds of so many developers. But then you fast forward to 2018, and the entire perception had flipped. The new Microsoft was actually seen as a company that would be a good steward for GitHub. It was a complete night-and-day transformation. So here's the crucial thing to understand. This warm welcome was no accident. The acquisition basically became a public vote, a referendum on this decade-long, very intentional journey by Microsoft to totally rebuild its relationship with developers. They didn't just stumble into this. They had spent years earning back trust and proving they had fundamentally changed. But let's be clear, this deal was about way more than just fixing a bad reputation. To really get why they spent $7.5 billion, we have to look past the surface and understand what Microsoft really got in this deal. Okay, so let's break it down into layers. On the first level, sure, they bought a product. A fantastic one, a world-class code repository with awesome tools. But more importantly, they bought the community. That's a direct line to millions upon millions of developers all over the world. And then, the ultimate prize, the real strategic asset here. It was the data. And you really can't overstate how powerful this data is. Think about it. When Microsoft bought LinkedIn, they got data on the business world. With GitHub, they got something just as valuable, the single biggest, cleanest data set on developer activity on the entire planet. They can see how developers behave. They can spot trends before anyone else. They can even compare how entire organizations are performing. This kind of data gives you what people call a defensible moat. It's a competitive advantage that is just incredibly difficult for anyone else to ever copy. Of course, a huge strategic move like this doesn't just happen on its own. It was driven by some very specific leaders who had the vision to see the opportunity and, maybe more importantly, the credibility to actually make it happen. It really all starts with Microsoft's CEO, Satya Nadella. For years, you had people inside Microsoft who wanted to embrace open source, but they were basically swimming upstream. Nadella came in and completely changed the culture. He got that open source wasn't the enemy, it was the new default. And he empowered those internal advocates to finally do what they knew is right. He created the conditions that made a deal like this even thinkable. And then you have Nat Friedman, who was brought in to be GitHub's new CEO. Honestly, he was the perfect choice. As a co-founder of Xamarin, he'd spent his whole career walking this tightrope between being a true open-source believer and a pragmatist who gets how the corporate world works. He was the ideal bridge between these two worlds, and his appointment sent a clear signal that GitHub's core spirit would be protected. But even with all the goodwill and the smart leadership, the deal still raised a brand new and pretty critical question for the future. As developer Elizabeth Joseph pointed out, this move added a whole new type of risk to the open source world. And this is the thought I really want to leave you with. Microsoft's strategy? Absolutely brilliant. But the deal fundamentally changed the entire landscape. The platform that is, for all intents and purposes, the heart of the global open source movement now belongs to one single proprietary company. And that leaves us with this one massive unanswered question about what happens next.